Rich Forrester's world spun off its axis the moment Brooke vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a 6-word confession that stabbed him deeper than any blade. "I've gone to find my happiness." He stared at the crumpled note in his trembling hand long after the taxi barreled away, its taillights dissolving into the smog-hazed dusk of Los Angeles, and felt the ground shift beneath him. All his plans, all the promises he'd whispered under the vaulted ceiling of the little chapel at Forrester Creations, evaporated like morning mist. Taylor Logan, sweet, intuitive Taylor, watched his despair with sympathetic eyes, her heart aching for the man she had quietly loved for years. She knew how he looked at Brooke, devotion twisted with longing, hope fused with fear of betrayal. Now that sacred bond lay in shards on the boulevard outside her home. Ridge's anguish became Taylor's mission. She guided him inside, sat him on the couch where he'd once proposed to Brooke, and listened as he tried to choke out what the note meant. Brooke, the love of his life, the woman he'd vowed to protect and cherish, had slipped out of LA under cover of night to pursue some vague promise of fulfillment with Nick, her on-again, off-again rival in love and power. The revelation crashed into Ridge like a tsunami. His knees buckled. Taylor caught him, her arms a delicate cradle, and in that moment she saw not the architect of Forrester's fashion empire, but a man undone by the woman he adored. Ridge's grief could have been a barricade between them, but Taylor's compassion became the mortar that held his crumbling world together. She brewed tea in the kitchen, letting its steam warm his frozen spirit, her presence a balm on his wounded soul. As night deepened outside, Ridge confessed the depth of his betrayal. He had built a life around Brooke's unwavering commitment, only to discover she'd walked away to marry Nick at an intimate ceremony in Tuscany, sending out rose-petal-strewed photographs that painted their union against the rolling hills under a golden sunset. Ridge saw those images online, Brooke's radiant smile, Nick's triumphant arm around her waist, and felt as if lightning had struck his heart. Every memory he shared with Brooke flashed before him in rapid succession. Their first dance at the winery, the clandestine meetings in Paris, the vow renewal on the beach. Nick had stolen those moments, not merely by wedding her, but by claiming her happiness as his own. Ridge's anguish morphed into fury. He slammed his fist into the cushion, shattering the fragile piece Taylor had coaxed from him, and she braced for impact, her concern eclipsing any resentment she might have felt at his anger. In the stillness that followed, Taylor realized the catastrophic power of Brooke's 6 words and the photographs from Tuscany. They had summoned Ridge's storm, and she was the one standing in its path. But rather than fleeing, she reached out, her touch gentle on his arm, and guided him away from the cliff edge of despair. Daylight found them curled up in the family room, sharing silent tears and whispered confessions. Taylor spoke of her own losses. Her journey from addiction, the emptiness she'd once known, and Ridge listened, his gaze softening as he recognized in her story a mirror of his pain. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he saw beyond the gilded facade of his own life and acknowledged the woman who had stood by him through every storm. Their bond, born of mutual suffering, quickly became something more combustible. Ridge reached for Taylor's hand. The shock of his touch sent electricity through her veins. He leaned in, his forehead finding hers, and for a moment the world narrowed to the two of them and the tremor of unspoken desire. He tasted Taylor's lips like a man starving for consolation, her kiss a promise of renewal amidst ruin. In that embrace, his grief was both soothed and complicated, for he knew he was betraying Brooke's memory even as he sought comfort in Taylor's arms. But Taylor, with her gentle strength, convinced him that in the wreckage of his heartbreak there lay the seeds of a new beginning, a truth neither of them could deny. As Ridge and Taylor surrendered to their burgeoning passion, Brooke's presence loomed like a ghost over every stolen touch. Ridge's guilt gnawed at him, yet he clung to Taylor's warmth, using her unwavering support to dull the ache left by Brooke's departure. They moved through the days in a blur of late-night conversations and early-morning rendezvous, their affair a refuge from the chaos that Brooke's absence had unleashed. Taylor reminded Ridge that he deserved happiness too, and in the glow of her conviction, he allowed himself to hope that love could be reclaimed, even if it meant forging it anew with someone other than the woman he once believed to be his destiny. But guilt and grief are fickle allies. Ridge, intoxicated by Taylor's empathy, began to see the cracks in their secret refuge. He found himself haunted by memories of Brooke, the way her laughter had filled his penthouse, the brush of her hair against his collar, the warmth of her hand in his. Taylor, perceptive as ever, noticed his restlessness. She urged him to be honest with himself. Did he truly love her, or was he merely escaping the pain Brooke had inflicted? Ridge's silence spoke volumes. He feared that by closing his eyes with Taylor, he had only deepened the wound left by Brooke's betrayal. While Ridge and Taylor tiptoed around these uncertainties, Brooke and Nick basked in the honeymoon glow in Tuscany. Travel photographers snapped clandestine shots of the newlyweds strolling through olive groves, their smiles untainted by regret. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #BrookeandNickForever and #TuscanRomance, drowning Ridge's world in cheers he could not hear. The press lauded Brooke's bold move to follow her heart, while insiders speculated that Ridge had finally lost the woman who defined him. Ridge, seething, watched the world heap sympathy on Brooke even as it vilified him for his possible transgressions. He resented Nick's smug victory, his rival's handsome grin plastered across every magazine cover, and a dull ache spread through him whenever he pictured Brooke's hand in Nick's. Taylor, ever the anchor, reminded Ridge that nostalgia could be a prison, but he found her words slipping through his fingers like sand. He dreaded the inevitable moment when Brooke would return, resplendent in her newfound bliss, and confront the reality of his betrayal. Would she see him with Taylor and tremble with hurt? Or would she unleash a tempest of anger that would reduce everything he had built to rubble? The fear coiled in his chest, and he realized that no matter how deeply he cared for Taylor, the specter of his past love would not be so easily exorcised. As mutual concern turned to confrontation, Ridge pulled Taylor into his office one evening, the walls lined with the sketches that had made Forrester iconic. He confessed that Brooke's departure had torn him apart, and while Taylor had been his salvation, he was haunted by the question of authenticity. Was their connection born of genuine love, or merely the desperation of two wounded souls seeking solace? Taylor's eyes shimmered with tears as she admitted her own fears, that Ridge would always measure her against Brooke, with her former wife's memory looming larger than any present reality. Ridge, tormented by the thought of losing Taylor before they had truly begun, reached for her face and vowed to choose love over loyalty to the past. Their pact to face the future together was tested when Brooke flew back to LA, her wedding dress folded neatly in her carry-on, her expression unreadable. She found Ridge and Taylor side by side in the grand foyer of the Forrester mansion, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Ridge took Brooke's hand, his heart pounding, while Taylor stood a step behind, her chest heaving with the weight of shared history. Brooke's gaze shifted between them, a question burning in her eyes. Had Ridge moved on, or was he forever bound to her? In that moment, the three people who had been enmeshed in a cycle of love, betrayal, and redemption stood poised on the brink of an explosive reckoning. No longer able to contain the storm, Brooke demanded the truth. Ridge spoke of his heartbreak, of the void left by her 6 words, and of the solace he'd found in Taylor's unwavering kindness. He told Brooke that their shared past would always be a part of him, but that he could no longer be the man who waited for her to decide if he was worth keeping. Taylor, finding courage she had never summoned before, stepped forward and declared her love for Ridge, insisting that they both deserved the chance to build something new, unshackled from memories of what had been. Brooke, torn between betrayal and the residual spark that had once drawn her to Ridge, pressed her hand to her heart. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Would Ridge's declaration of independence fracture the bonds that once held them, or would the three of them discover that love's permutations were endless? In the echo of their truths, the future of Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor trembled on a knife's edge. Each had chased happiness in their own way, Brooke to Tuscany with Nick, Ridge to Taylor's arms in a moment of desperation, but now they faced the hardest question of all. Could love, once broken and reforged, survive the revelations it had wrought, or would each be condemned to wander the corridors of Forrester creations haunted by echoes of a past that refused to stay buried? Only time would tell which path they would choose, but one thing was certain. In the world of the bold and the beautiful, no heart remained unscarred, and every ending was merely the prelude to another dramatic beginning. Eric Forrester's cough came in ragged, violent fits, each spasm leaving a darker stain on the pristine handkerchief he clutched to his lips, and as the wildfire rumors spread through the halls of Forrester Creations that his condition had taken a grave turn, the entire dynasty bristled with the instinct to seize what might soon lie unguarded. In conference rooms and in the hushed corridors where sketches of tomorrow's couture were pinned to corkboards, Ridge and Thorne moved like dueling chess masters, each calculating how to position himself as the natural successor to their patriarch's vast empire. Brooke, sidelined by neither blood nor official title, yet armed with decades of intimate knowledge of Eric's capricious instincts, listened to whispered hypotheses of medical prognosis and speculated over coffee with Caroline and Donna, while her eyes flickered with a determination born of years spent waiting for the right moment to protect the family that had made her both queen and outsider in turn. When the first draft of Eric's preliminary will was delivered to the attorney's chambers, typed on royal blue stationery, his familiar calligraphic flourish stamped atop the page, it contained but one shocking clause, a single bullet point citing a secret heir, one whose name remained stubbornly blank in the initial rendering. As though the patriarch refused to allow even his closest loves to know until the final breath had left his body. From the second Ridge tore open that envelope, the Forrester world ignited. Sibs and spouses, board members and bystanders all felt the tremor of his revelation and dove headfirst into the scramble. Thorne, pale with outrage and ambition, insisted that Eric's intent must have been to enshrine a child of his own blood, yet Ridge, more attuned to his father's leather-bound journals and the secrets they contained, surmised that Eric's final choice might defy every expectation. Brooke, wounded by Brookeness yet galvanized by her stake in the company's legacy, threw herself into the fray, poring over hospital records and private letters, ransacking drawers, and pressing reluctant witnesses for cryptic confidences. Each clue, an unsigned memo found in Eric's bedside drawer, a photograph tucked behind family portraits, a strangely reverent footnote in the collection of love letters he'd penned to Stephanie, seemed to point in conflicting directions, and as the days stretched on with Eric drifting in and out of lucidity, the three of them formed an uneasy alliance. They camped in his study, sifting through his strategic blueprints, poring over stockholder reports, and tracing the fine threads of potential heirs. Caroline's brief dream of stepping in was dashed by her own grief. The newborn granddaughter born of Eric's deep remorse for a long-ago betrayal seemed too fragile to anchor a corporate throne, and Maya's boy, a child of Eric's youngest daughter, was whispered to be the object of secret adoration, but nothing concrete emerged. All the while, Eric lay in his high-backed armchair, the gentle click of oxygen machines punctuating the rhythm of his breaths, and at night, Ridge found himself standing in the doorway of his father's study, staring at the shadows on the book-lined walls, fighting equal impulses to console his grandfather and to wrest that blank line in the will into his own name. Thorn, for his part, took to shadowing Brooke, offering her a wary olive branch while spying for advantage, his brown eyes calculating the moment he could betray their truce and claim any discovery as his own. Brooke, acutely aware of the razor's edge on which they tread, warned them both that if they turned on each other, the family would be lost, the company would fracture, and the fabric of all they stood for would unravel just as the patriarch lay dying. As the week dragged on, each day punctuated by fresh episodes of blood-streaked expectorations and new medical pronouncements that ranged from cautiously optimistic to grim, the trio unearthed a document so startling it threatened to blow apart every presumption they held. A sealed envelope addressed simply to My Chosen, tucked behind the false spine of Eric's earliest volume of poetry, one he had written as a young man long before the runway lights dazzled him or the tragedies hardened his heart. The wax seal bore the Forrester family crest, and inside was a single sheet of vellum, inscribed in Eric's steady hand, "To whomever you are, blood or no, this legacy becomes yours, that you may learn both the burden and the grace I have known. Use it better than I. No name." Only those words dripped with paternal expectation and mystery. Ridge's jaw clenched around the memory of Eric's rare praise when Ridge saved the business from the brink of collapse. Thorn's heart raced as he recalled his own boyhood moments of connection when Eric confided in him about Stephanie's betrayals, and Brooke, feeling the weight of decades of devotion and heartbreak, resolved that if anyone deserved that empire, it was the one who could cherish it while preserving the family's unity. Their investigations spiraled from the corporate ledger into the labyrinth of Eric's past, the clandestine, decade-old liaison with a romance novelist, the illegitimate infant born on a storm-swept night, said to have vanished into obscurity, the half-siblings earning degrees overseas who had never known their father's name. They chased rumors to Parisian archives, questioned long-retired pilots who had flown Eric under cover of darkness to discreet rendezvous, and unearthed hospital records in Geneva under pseudonyms. For every thread they pulled, they discovered another obscurity faster than they could untangle it, until exhaustion blurred with obsession, and they feared that time was slipping through their fingers as surely as the sands in an hourglass. In the final hours, as Eric's breathing labored into a cadence so soft it barely registered over the hiss of the monitors, the trio gathered one last time in the hushed solemnity of his bedside. Ridge, clad in an impeccably tailored suit that felt suddenly superfluous, pressed Thorn's hand in an unspoken plea for solidarity. Thorn, cheeks hollow but eyes bright with a new respect for his brother, nodded once and stepped aside, and Brooke, her throat tight with tears, unfolded the vellum and read aloud Eric's words until the candle flickered low. They realized then that the secret heir was not necessarily the one with the strongest blood claim, but the one with the deepest understanding of what the Forrester name truly meant, an unbreakable devotion to both creativity and compassion, to family and to the art that bore their signature. Ridge glanced at Brooke and Thorn, their faces pale in the soft glow, and saw in their united silence the reflection of Eric's final wish. As the great clock in the hall told midnight, the monitors flatlined, and Eric exhaled his last breath. In that shattering stillness, Ridge closed his eyes against the agony of loss, then opened them on a new truth. The secret heir was not a stranger at all, but the three of them together, bound by blood, by love, and by this crucible of grief and revelation. and it would be their sacred duty to steward his empire as one heart, one family. Unchained from the past and poised to honor Eric's legacy in ways he had only dreamed possible.